We talked last week about the promise to the house of David, and that's the setting for this week's lesson. We better go back there and look at 2 Samuel 7 again. 2 Samuel 7. Does anybody remember the content of this? Can you say it in simple terms? What did David want? Build a temple, but he wanted much more than that. What did building a temple indicate in the ancient world? More than power, something very specific. What was David after? If you don't get this, you don't get this week's lesson either. What was David after in his desire to build a temple? What did temple building mean in ancient Palestine? I spent a long time on the Baal epic.
They're God.
What?
They're God.
Yeah.
Presence of God.
Presence of God, powerful, that's not really it yet. What did building a temple signify in the ancient world? Spent a long time describing the Baal epic. What happened in Canaan when the king built a temple? What was he asking for? Okay, let me describe it again. No, they could have had God's presence in a sanctuary, in a tent shrine. David wanted to build a permanent temple instead of a tent shrine. Why? What was he after? He was after something for himself. Let me describe this again. When Baal built a temple, according to the Baal epic, what did it indicate? It indicated his eternal rule over the gods. His eternal rule. The temple builder in ancient Canaan was the person who would rule forever. David's desire to build a temple was a desire to found an eternal dynasty. Let me say it again. What David wanted was a dynasty that would stand forever. That's what building a temple indicated. Let's look at 2 Samuel 7 again. It was understood that that's what he was after. Now, when the king dwelt in his house, and the Lord had given him rest from all his enemies round about, the king said to Nathan the prophet, "See now, I dwell in a palace of cedar, but the ark of God dwells in a tent." And Nathan said to the king, "Go, do all that is in your heart." Now Nathan did not ponder this long enough. It was too soon. Had Saul's monarchy been an hereditary monarchy? Was Saul's kingship hereditary? No. How do you know that? Yes, that's right. He was Nagid. He was the military prince, which was not a hereditary position. Yes. Now, the more pagan elements in Israelite society had accepted the idea that Saul's kingship would be hereditary. Many of the people presumed that Saul's successor would be whom? Jonathan, his oldest son. So a good many of the more pagan disposed people had already accepted the principle of a dynastic monarchy. Verse 4, "But that same night the word of the Lord came to Nathan, Go and tell my servant David, Thus says the Lord, Would you build me a house to dwell in? I have not dwelt in a house since the day I brought up the people of Israel from Egypt to this day, but I have been moving about in a tent for my dwelling. In all places where I have moved with all the people of Israel, did I speak a command to any of the judges of Israel, whom I commanded to shepherd my people Israel, saying, Why have you not built me a house of cedar? Now therefore, thus you shall say to my servant David, thus says Yahweh of hosts, that's the warrior name of God, notice. I took you from the pasture, from following the sheep, that you should be prince over my people Israel. And there's that phrase, prince. And I have this military commander, and I've been with you wherever you went, and I've cut off all your enemies from before you. And I will make for you a great name, like the name of the great ones of the earth. And I will appoint a place for my people Israel, and will plant them that they may dwell in their own place, and be disturbed no more, and violent men shall afflict them no more as formerly, from the time that I appointed judges over my people Israel. And I will give you rest from all your enemies. Now, in the original construction of the language, that was the whole end. The text has been run together. The next word is from a later period. The first answer, which was off the cuff, which the prophet just spoke as he listened to David, was, yes, go ahead, build a temple. The second answer, and there are three answers, the second answer was what? Yes, it's a no. The second answer is a clear and definite no. It doesn't say no later or no sometime. It just says no. Why no? Why? No to the dynastic principle. No to the attempt to Canaanize the Yahwist religion. Now there's a third answer here, and it begins right in the middle of verse 11. My translation is the RSV, and it says moreover. Does anybody have a different translation? Also?
The word also is where
Okay, yours says also. What translation is that? Okay. Does anybody have a different one? Right in the middle of verse 11. 2 Samuel 7. What I want you to know is that structurally, that's the beginning of a new passage. What does yours say? 2 Samuel 7, verse 11.
I don't see it.
Is this,
The
The New English, yes. It says, and. The Lord has told you that he will give you, okay. Yes, all right. So the New English just begins a new sentence there. What I want you to know is that structurally, as far as the language is concerned, chapter 7, verse 11, right in the middle there, is a new paragraph and the beginning of a new section. This is a third answer. Many scholars believe it wasn't given at the same time that the first answer was given. All right? You following me now? The middle of verse 11. This is a third answer given by the prophet, possibly at the same time, but most scholars believe at a later period. Okay? It says, now the Lord announces that the Lord will make you a house. So this is a very dramatic, very, very dramatic moment when the prophet announces to David that God is going to build David a house. Get this, and what's happening in the chapters that were assigned for this week will make sense. How many answers did Nathan give to David? How many? What have I said so far? 3. 1, sure, do everything you want to do. 2, no. I've never asked anybody to do such a thing, and I don't want you to do such a thing. 3, what's the third one? Now comes the announcement from the Lord that the Lord is going to build you a house. 3 answers. Okay? Now let's look at the third answer, because that's the background to today's lesson. Now the Lord declares to you that the Lord will make you a house. This is the announcement to David. When your days are fulfilled, and you lie down with your fathers, I will raise up your offspring after you, who shall come forth from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. So, what's it going to be? What's the house? A dynasty. Based on a promised child, offspring, seed. What's the problem with David in particular of promising him that your seed will be the one who will build the temple, and your seed is the one that I will establish forever, and your seed is the one who will establish the great age of peace? What's the problem with saying that to David? What? Think now.
There was a prophecy about Christ.
No, I don't think it was a prophecy about Christ. Ultimately, it became that. Ultimately, that became its ultimate meaning, but originally, I don't think that's what it meant. Yes? No, but what you said is correct. That's right. But the problem here is that the word seed refers to someone. She brought it up. Who does it refer to? Now let's go back and put ourselves in David's shoes. Mind you now, we do not know, because the text is corrupt, we do not know when the third answer was given. We know that the first answer was given one day, and the second answer was given the very next day because of a vision in the night. How much time elapsed between the second answer, no, you're not building a temple, and the third answer, yes, the Lord is going to build you a dynastic house? How much time elapsed? Nobody knows. But there was elapsed time. Now, the time came when this dramatic announcement was made to David: the Lord has decided to build you a house. And your seed who comes forth from you will be the person who will establish the age of world peace. He's the person who will build the temple and so forth. Now I asked this question: what was the problem with the third answer? Did David have a wife? Yes. Did David have a wife? What? Well, there's 17 or so named, and then it stops and says the others, and it starts giving titles. And did he have some children? Did he have some children? He had lots of children. Now, you must understand, this was an exceedingly dramatic announcement. The announcement by a prophet that David was going to have a dynasty, and that his dynasty was going to rule forever. This narrows down the promise to Abraham. What was the covenant promise to Abraham? Same word. That same word. What? Yes, in his seed, all the nations would be blessed. And so up to that point, the covenant promise to Abraham, the seed was who? Israel. Now, this theologically narrowed it down. The promised seed that was going to bless the world isn't Israel here, it's what? What? David's son. Which one? Now, if you were Adonijah, who would you think it was, if you were the oldest son? Yeah, of course. Adonijah, the oldest son, presumed it was him. Unfortunately, he wasn't the most charismatic son. He wasn't the most aggressive one. He wasn't the most politically astute one of the bunch. Adonijah was, in fact, rather dumb. In these chapters, well, should I be more subtle? he wasn't well suited to become the fulfiller of this prophecy. Let's say it that way. There was another half-brother that was much more subtle, and who was that? Absalom. What does that mean? Oh, do names count in the ancient world? Yeah, they count a lot. It helps to know that his name means the Father of Peace. Peace. Shalom. You know shalom. Right. His son's name was the Father of Peace. And how does that relate to this prophecy here? Let's go back and read just the third prophecy now. Unfortunately, it begins in the middle of verse 11. How come a brand new section begins in the middle of a verse? Because the monk who divided the Bible into chapters and verses in the 9th century didn't know a lot of theology, but he was a hard-working man. Now look, his name was Exiguus, and we thank him for his hard work, even though he often made mistakes in division. Here's one of them. In the middle of verse 11, now the Lord announces to you that the Lord will make you a house.
It's a royal house.
Yes, right, it's a dynastic house. When your days are fulfilled and you lie down with your fathers, that's a good example of giving a sense translation instead of a literal translation. It does mean royal house, but it doesn't say royal in Hebrew. The New English Bible tends to translate the meaning rather than the exact words. That's a sense translation rather than a word translation. When your days are fulfilled and you lie down with your fathers, I will raise up your offspring after you. And this word seed is one of those funny words that's a collective plural, right? Is seed singular or plural? Well, yeah, that's right. And in fact, it's a singular word all the time that often means a plural, doesn't it? So this sets the stage. I was going to say this is the seed from which, but that would be too complicated. This sets the stage for the problem. What is meant by the seed here? I will raise up your seed after you, who shall come forth from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name. I'm now verse 13. 7:13. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. Now, you said, I'm going to pick on you here for a moment, you said this was Jesus, and that's right. That's called the analogical meaning. That's the third of the three ways. Let's go back to the exegesis. Just exegetically, looking at the text as it stands, this promised seed had to be what? It couldn't have been Christ. Why? It's referring to someone who what? It's referring to someone who what?
Was born from.
Right. Who comes right born from David. Exactly. So in its exegetical meaning, this seed is one of the sons. Now, a lot of them were already adults. Remember that there wasn't a generation gap in the ancient world. Why was that? When David was taken to Saul's court and married off, he was just a teenager, right? Because what was the right thing to do? They married the children when they reached puberty. There wasn't any teenage gap. Later on, David's descendants were co-regents. The father and the son were king together as soon as the son reached age 13. And you can see by looking at the regency dates how old they were when they had their children. How old were they? Yes, 13, 14, 15. Most people had their children by the time they were 16. See? That's why it says in the second commandment, visiting the iniquities of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generation. Why? Because 30 grandparents, 45 great-grandparents, 60 you died. You would be raising the third and fourth generation. So an evil man would have influence over what? In this patriarchal society. He'd have influence over the third and fourth generation. Now, he shall build a house, verse 13, for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. Now, theologically, this was a big deal. A promise is being made to one of David's sons that he's going to sit on David's throne, and his throne is going to be established forever. An eternal dynasty. Was this a promise to be grabbed at? Now, this is by a legitimate prophet. This is Nathan, the court prophet. Do you think people sat up and took notice of this prophecy? Oh, this became the big touchstone in Old Testament theology. This was the big central deal. The promise to the world through Abraham was now going to be fulfilled through the house of David, through a particular son of David, who would found a dynastic line. Now you've got to understand that all these adult sons, they already had what? They had wives, and therefore they had children, and since some of them were already beyond the age of 30, many of them had what? Grandchildren. And what did they want? They wanted to be the ones who would be this dynasty. Now, a lot of these children were half-pagan kids of the daughters of pagan kings. So, of course, the wives that came from, say, Tyre and Sidon, they saw an eternal dynasty that linked Israel to Phoenicia, okay? The Philistine wives saw it as connecting the Syrian princess saw Israel connected forever to Syria. You see? This dynastic promise became a big political deal. And did these sons have rivalries? They represented different nations. They maintained different courts. They maintained different ambassadors and houses. David was rich, and so were his children. And that's what we're studying about in this week's lesson. Unspoken, without anybody having to say a word, David, having built an empire on political marriages, created the seeds of disaster for himself, right? Now look, family life is hard at its best. Can you imagine what it would be like in this situation? There must have been days when David thought he should have stayed with those sheep. Was everybody delighted in the principle of a dynastic monarchy? First of all, you have to understand that the conservatives in Israel were still grinding their teeth. Why? It wasn't the judges. It was a king. They weren't that far from the beginning of kingship, were they? And now you've moved all the way from a simple military commander, as Saul was chosen to be, all the way to what? A dynastic monarchy on the principle of the pagans, built on the concept of Baal ruling forever. This is what it means when it says, the king is dead, long live the king. Where does that come from? It comes from Samuel. Because it's the dynastic principle. When one king dies, what? The king and the kingship goes right on. Why? Because that king is what? Is the representative of the national God. And just as the national God rules forever, this dynasty what? Rules forever. Let's go back to the 89th Psalm, because I didn't read all of it last week, deliberately. Psalm 89. This psalm is somewhat tricky. You don't really know where this psalm is going until you get far into its verses. The opening, the poet here now says, I will sing of thy steadfast love, O Lord, forever. With my mouth I will proclaim thy faithfulness to all generations. For thy steadfast love was established forever. Thy faithfulness is as firm as the heavens. What is the psalmist's topic? The psalmist's topic is God's faithfulness, and he says that God's faithfulness is as sure as the structure of the universe, the order of the cosmos. Just as sure as the structure of the creation, God is faithful. Now we find out further on that he's talking about his faithfulness to the promise to the house of David. Thou hast said, I have made a covenant with my chosen one. I have sworn to David my servant, I will establish your descendants forever and build your throne to all generations. Now, his topic is his faithfulness to the promise to David. Now watch what he starts talking about. Verse 5. Let the heavens praise thy wonders, O Lord, and thy faithfulness in the assembly of the holy ones. Okay, so here's God up on the cosmic mountain with the holy ones, the heavenly beings surrounding him. Okay? For who in the skies can be compared to Yahweh? Who among the heavenly beings is like Yahweh? Okay, he proclaims Yahweh as the highest God. A God feared in the council of the holy ones, great and terrible above all that are round about him. Now you do understand, don't you, that in their minds there was this conception of a heavenly court of heavenly beings. And one of the big arguments was which God is the top God. Do you understand that, right? And obviously in the Old Testament they're always going to be proclaiming what? That in the assembly of the gods, who's the top God? Yahweh, the God of Israel, okay? Now, do you get the picture? I thought he was talking about David and the dynasty of David. Oh, he is. He is. He begins by talking about the heavenly court and Yahweh's rule over the heavenly court because he's making a comparison. You're supposed to be able to figure it out, and he's going to make it explicit later on. What is he comparing?
Heaven and earth.
And whose rule to whose rule? Say Yahweh, because they were all gods up there. Yahweh's rule to David's rule. Just as Yahweh rules over the other gods, so on earth, David rules over the other kings of the earth. Got it? He's comparing the rule of God to the rule of David's house. Okay? Verse 8. O Yahweh, God of hosts, who is mighty as thou art, O Yahweh, with thy faithfulness round about thee. Thou dost rule the raging of the sea. When its waves rise, thou stillest them. Thou didst crush Rahab like a carcass. Now this is not Rahab the prostitute. What is this? This is the name of the great, this is the name, the official name of the great chaos monster, the great seven-headed dragon who lived in the sea. This seven-headed dragon doesn't first turn up in Revelation. This is a very ancient symbol. All this does is tell us that that woman from Jericho must have been quite a woman because she was named after the chaos monster. Right? You get the picture of what she must have been like? They named her Rahab after the chaos monster of the deep. Ironically, she was the only one who survived. Thou didst crush Rahab like a carcass, and thou didst scatter thy enemies with thy mighty arm. The heavens are thine, the earth also is thine, the world and all that is in it, and thou hast founded them. The north and the south, thou hast created them. Tabor and Hermon, these great mountains, joyously praise thy name. Thou hast a mighty arm, strong is thy hand, high thy right hand. Righteousness and justice are the foundation of thy throne. Steadfast love and faithfulness are before thee. Blessed are the people who know the festival shout, who walk, O Yahweh, the light of thy countenance, who exult in thy name all the day, and extol thy righteousness. For thou art the glory of their strength. By thy favor our horn is exalted, meaning our king. For our shield belongs to Yahweh, our shield meaning our king to the Holy One of Israel. All right, now, as God is the central ruler of the whole cosmos, who rules the chaos monster, who rules order and chaos, who has absolute control over the cosmos, just as God's rule is in the heavens, what is there on the earth? David's rule. Right? Okay. This was the official state religion of Judah and Israel. The house of David was the means by which God ruled the world. Did you get that? The house of David had become the means by which God ruled the world. Verse 19. Of old thou didst speak in a vision to thy faithful one and say, I have set a crown on one who is mighty. I have exalted one chosen from the people. I have found David my servant. You get the picture of God looking for someone. I have found David my servant. With my holy oil I have anointed him, so that my hand shall ever abide with him. My arm also shall strengthen him. Now, what does David mean anyway? It means the beloved one. It was his state or royal name. This individual's name was Elnathan, God's gift. Are you catching this? The person we know as David, his name was Elnathan. David was his royal or court name. It means the beloved one. Beloved by whom? Yes. So verse 20, I have found David my servant. With my holy oil I have anointed him, so that my hand shall ever abide with him. My arm also shall strengthen him. The enemy shall not outwit him. The wicked shall not humble him. I will crush his foes before him and strike down those who hate him. My faithfulness and my steadfast love shall be with him, and in my name shall his horn be exalted. I will set his hand on the sea and his right hand on the rivers. This is something that God does, because the sea and the rivers are the what? The gods, the nations, the powers of the earth. Okay? He shall cry to me, Thou art my Father, my God, and the rock of my salvation, and I will make him the firstborn, the highest of the kings of the earth. My steadfast love I will keep for him forever, and my covenant will stand firm for him. I will establish his line forever, and his throne as the days of the heavens. If his children forsake my law and do not walk according to my ordinances, if they violate my statutes and do not keep my commandments, then I will punish their transgression with the rod and their iniquity with scourges, but I will not remove from him my steadfast love, or be false to my faithfulness. I will not violate my covenant, or alter the word that went forth from my lips. Once for all I have sworn by my holiness, I will not lie to David. His line shall endure forever. His throne as long as the sun before me. Like the moon, it shall be established forever. It shall stand firm while the skies endure. So, the throne of David has become what? Not just a political element, has become what? It has become part of the order and structure of nature. The throne of David is as fixed as the sun, the moon, the stars, the sky. The psalmist is really going all out here, right? The house of David is the rule of God. Right? Once you elevate a monarchy to the theological position of God, you have potential troubles. Right? Suppose the king is bad. Right? Suppose the king is bad. Suppose you don't know who the king is. Right? Suppose it wasn't clear which one was in control. All right? Now let's go back to 2 Samuel 7. Verse 13 again. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish my throne, the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father, and he will be my son. What did I say the Son of God meant in the Old Testament? This is a common phrase. When they're referring to the Son of God, who are they referring to? The King. Okay, and this is where the equation came in. The Son of David equals the Son of God. When he commits iniquity, I will chasten him with the rod of men, with the stripes of the sons of men. But I will not take my steadfast love from him, as I took it from Saul, whom I put away from before you. And your house and your kingdom shall be made sure forever before me. Your throne shall be established forever. In accordance with all these words, in accordance with all this vision, Nathan spoke to David. So there's another equation here. There's an equation of house equals house. What house equals what house? David wanted to build a house. What was the house? What? The temple. The temple. Which I told you in the Canaanite religion was the physical, outer representation of the eternal rule of Baal. When Baal built the temple, it indicated he would rule forever. David knew this. When David asked to build a temple, he was asking for an eternal dynasty. And he's been told, no, you won't build it, but what? The first answer was, yes, you can build it. The second answer was, no, you can't build it. And the third answer was, what? Number 3 says, yes, I'm going to build you a house, specifically through your promised seed. And he'll build a house for my name. So now then, there's another equation. The house that was built in Jerusalem is equivalent to the house that God is building for David. The temple in Jerusalem was the physical outer symbol of the eternal rule of David. That temple was the dynastic symbol par excellence. You want to see what the rule of David's house is like? Look at the temple. Because that temple is the house. Right? House equals house. Now, how did things go for the house of David after this promise was made? Well, what happens next? After this, David defeated the Philistines and subdued them. And he took the border regions away from the Philistines and appended them once and for all to Judah. Verse 2, he defeated Moab, measured them with a line, making them lie down on the ground, 2 lions to be put to death and 1 to be spared. David also, verse 3, defeated Hadad-ezer, the son of Rechab, the king of Zobah, as he went to restore his power at the river Euphrates. All right. David took, verse 9, Hamath in Syria. All right. Verse 13, David won a name for himself. When he returned, he slew 18,000 Edomites in the valley of Salt and put garrisons throughout Edom. So what happened after the promise to David that all the world will be blessed through you? What did he do? In rapid succession, he did what? He subdued all the surrounding nations so that he came into possession of a political empire from the Euphrates to the Suez Canal. That is what is meant by Greater Judea and Samaria. So when leaders of the modern state of Israel says, we want to restore Greater Judea and Samaria, the people in Lebanon get outraged, the people in Syria get outraged, the people in Jordan get outraged. Even the sometime leader of Iraq got enraged because that's a third of his country. Why? If you restored all that, what would happen? The Jewish state would be ruling over all these nations. They know what it means. Yes. Okay. Now, and of course, David then in chapter 9 absorbed the house of Saul into his own house. That's what chapter 9 is about. After this, chapter 10, and this wasn't covered in the lessons and should have been, in chapter 10, this is after this promise is given, one of the subdued nations in Transjordan deigns it necessary to insult David. They stripped his ambassadors naked and sent them back naked. Why did the king of the Ammonites deliberately attempt to insult David? He was furious that David had this great empire in his control, and he was being drawn in because, after all, Ammon is only 50 miles from Jerusalem. It's just on the other side of the Jordan Valley. It's the capital of today's kingdom of Jordan. It's where the king of Jordan lives today. And the king of the Ammonites was not pleased with the situation he found himself in. It was only going to be a moment before what happened. Edom was gone, Moab was gone, to the north of them, all the independent city-states of Syria were gone. What was going to happen to him? He knew it. So what did he do? He took this occasion, yes. Instead of waiting for it to happen, he wasn't going to send tribute. He took a stand. Now, of course, this is all theological. The writer is telling you that this all happened after the promise to the house of David, that the house of David would be the blessing on the world. And so you know what's going to happen to this Ammonite king. It's only a matter of time before what? He's going to be gone. Yes. And the Syrians, yes, the Syrians tried to make one last stand to help the Ammonites to their south, but that didn't work either. Now then, that's the end of that section. David does subdue the empire promised in the prophecy to Nathan, and he does conquer all the world from Asia to Africa. Okay. Then in chapter 11 we begin a new literary section. The writing is somewhat different, the style is somewhat different. It's considered one of the great sections of the Old Testament. It has a name, a title. It's called the Throne Succession Narrative. The throne succession narrative. Why would there be such a thing as the throne succession narrative? Well, from what we've already said, theologically, you know why. As soon as this promise was made to the house of David, that in David's seed all the world would be blessed, what immediately happened? This was a setup for what? David's children what? Immediately began to jockey for position to find out which one was going to be the promised seed. Right? And that's what the throne succession narrative is all about. Because the throne succession narrative was written to establish that the person who finally got David's throne was the person that the prophecy had been about in the first place. Do you understand what I'm saying? There were various partisans in David's kingdom who wanted now one son and now another to be the promised seed and to take over in David's place. And the throne succession narrative was there to say that no, it wasn't this one. No, it wasn't that one. And it wasn't that one over there. That the person who ended up with it was the legitimate person who should have fulfilled the promise. Now there's an irony, of course. The child that was to fulfill the promise wasn't there yet. What? At the time of the Nathan prophecy, it wasn't any of these little children of David. It wasn't any of the older children of David's. It wasn't any of the young married children of David's. It wasn't any of his older adult sons who were fathers and grandfathers. The child what? Wasn't even born yet. And the throne succession narrative is all about that. Okay, now, chapter 11 and verse 1. This is the beginning of a narrative. And it begins, once upon a time. Why did I say that? Because there are standard ways in Hebrew by which you begin a story. We recognize that the words once upon a time don't signal the end of a story, right? Just as you recognize, and they all lived happily ever after is what? Is the end. This is the beginning of a story, and it's quite a story. In the spring of a certain year, are you with me? Chapter 11, verse 1. In the spring of a certain year, the time came for kings to go forth to war. Do you hear how general that is? When do kings fight? In the spring. So he begins, in the spring of a certain year, the time came for kings to go forth to war. Picture this cycle of stories being told in an ancient court. And David sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel. And they ravaged the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah. What was Rabbah? Huh? It's the fortress of Ammon. Right there in the center of the city is this giant citadel that stands up in the center of the city. The National Museum is there now. It's also a militarily restricted area, if you. But David remained in Jerusalem. It happened late one certain afternoon. What? You're laughing again. He's setting it up, right? It's a general story. It happened late one afternoon that David arose from his couch and was walking on the roof of the king's palace. Now, of course, this word house has theological meaning for us. And he saw from the roof a woman bathing. And this woman was extremely beautiful. David sent and inquired about the woman, and one said, "Is this not Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite, the daughter of the covenant?" It's seven, or covenant, or oath. The daughter of the covenant. She is the daughter of Eliam, so she's a Hebrew. She's the wife of Uriah the Hittite. All right, these Hittites, this could have been the Hittite Empire of central Turkey, or it could have been the Hittites who had lived in Canaan for several centuries, probably the latter. In any case, she was not married to a Hebrew. Man's not a Hebrew, but what is he? Okay. So David sent messengers and took her, and she came to him, and he lay with her. Now she was purifying herself from her uncleanness. And she returned to her house, and the woman conceived, and sent and told David, "I am with child." Now, of course, commentators have discussed this for centuries, what her motives may have been, whether it was all accidental, whether she was the innocent victim in all this. We find her later to be what? Is this woman a receding woman who just sort of was caught in the wiles of everything and didn't know how to maneuver? We find out what? She's quick. We find out later that she's very adept at arranging coups, at destroying her enemies, at putting down the half-children of her son, and is very capable at pushing forward his... and the last time we see her, she's the queen mother, sitting quietly at the side of her son who's become the emperor. Yes. So maybe she was an innocent victim, and maybe is it awful to suggest this? Maybe what? You don't think she was all that innocent? Maybe she had planned what? To have the king's child. Why? There was this rabid atmosphere in Jerusalem that what? His promises have been made to the house of David, and it's all unsure who David's going to choose. Maybe David could have made a simple statement to Nathan. Listen, I'm going to have lots of trouble because I've married lots of wives and I have lots of children, and they're all vying for position. I'm in trouble. Ask the Lord which one it is, and then I'll announce it, and that'll be the end of it. Why didn't David do that? Because if you announced that it was the daughter of the king of Geshur's son who was going to be the promised seed, then what did you do? You offended 20 other kings. Do you see the problem? If he did that, if he announced which son was the promised seed, then all the other sons would be offended, and all the nations they represented would be offended. Do you see that he'd gotten himself into quite a situation here? So David remained silent about which son was the promised son. Now, the woman here says she's with child, and then you know David's machinations, his famous machinations. He had gotten himself into a pagan concept of kingship, which was what? See, I said this promise of the house of David had danger in it if the king wasn't good. And in the pagan mold, whatever the king did was by definition what? By definition, if the king did it, what? It was right. There was nothing like this in the pagan kingdoms. There weren't any prophets coming telling parables. Why? In a pagan court, prophets who came and told parables, what? Would find themselves dead. So David did what any king in his day would do. He had a problem. He had a husband who wasn't cooperating to cover a pregnancy. He was going to be implicated, so he had the husband murdered in a very logical way. Murdered. How? Well, of course. See, David had been tolerating for a long time a certain cousin. We've been talking about this cousin week by week. Yeah, now mind you, David had once tried to murder Joab. What? Do you remember what David had said? He had tried to get rid of Joab by saying, Joab was his military commander. He was Nagib. And he said, listen, I want to take this citadel of the Jebusites and make it my capital. And I'm not going to leave you as the military commander. I'm going to say, whoever gets up there first and gets into the city first is going to get that position. And what did David have in mind? He had been embarrassed repeatedly by his cousin. What did he have in mind? Either Joab won't be first, in which case I don't have to deal with him anymore, or what? Or he'll go first and what? And get killed, and I won't have to deal with him anymore. One way or the other, David had intended to be rid of Joab, and he wasn't. Now, the fact that Joab had murdered Abner was still very much a problem. Okay? So, David relied on his cousin to arrange a murder for him, because he knew, based on past experience, would this be a problem? No. He knew that to arrange a murder would be no problem for Joab. Joab had done it several times. However, I thought it was so good in the quarterly, in the Teacher's Quarterly, the author made reference to what Joab must have thought about David's public statements about how awful Joab was and how he was absolving himself of Joab's actions and how he and his kingdom had nothing to do with Joab's actions, when the secret message came from David that now he wanted a murder arranged. Was Joab adverse to doing this murder? Did he say, no, that's wrong, no? What? I don't think he merely complied. I think that he, from his further actions, we found out that he didn't merely comply, he was overjoyed. Why? You see, what did he have in his pocket now? He had a certain story of a murder that the king had committed in his pocket. And what did that do to Joab's position? That increased it, yes. So, now, David, with the help of his cousin, had this murder carried out. Now verse 26, 11:26. When the wife of Uriah keep going, she said, keep going. We're in the middle of the throne succession narrative. The story gets more interesting as we go along. We'll keep at it. Thank you.